On the show today, we have guests Jacobē Bell and Reshma Ramkellawan. Dr. Jacobē Bell is a transformative education leader specializing in English language arts and culturally responsive school improvement. As the visionary behind a Bill and Melinda Gates funded network for school improvement, she drives systemic change through high leverage strategies while leading literacy consultants to ensure sustainable growth. With over 20 years as a national board certified teacher, coach, and administrator, Jacobē excels in curriculum development, instructional excellence, and leadership coaching across public and charter sectors. Her expertise includes mentoring educators and supporting school transformation. Dr. Reshma Ramkellawan has dedicated over 14 years to transforming educational outcomes as a teacher, school leader, and instructional coach. With deep expertise in English language arts and humanities, she has worked across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, supporting educators in implementing culturally responsive and student-centered practices that honor diverse learners. Holding a doctorate in English education from Teachers College, Columbia University, Reshma is a passionate advocate for disruptive educational practices that challenge traditional systems and empower all students. Her work focuses on creating equitable learning environments where every student can thrive. Get ready for an amazing episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Dr. Ramkellawan, Dr. Bell, so nice to have you on the Time for Teachership podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
I am thrilled about the book that you wrote. I'm sure you're both thrilled as well that it is out in the world and probably took a lot of labor. Reclaiming Authenticity. I want people to know that this is kind of the frame for the conversation. So we'll link at any point you're like, yep, got to get that. We will link to that in the show notes and the blog post for the episode. But is there anything that either of you want listeners or folks engaging with the episode to know or think about as we kind of enter the conversation about the book?
I can start us off with this. I think it's important for us to know as authors, we are teachers first, and we are coaches. And so we enter this with our teacher heart, and our coach hat. And it's written from years of experience of like doing this work.
Yeah, to echo what Jacoby said, I think we exist in a time where teachers are often dehumanized, demoralized, seen as the main cause of all of our educational failings as a country. And we wanted to rethink that narrative and shift how teachers can be seen and like poured into when they're receiving lots of external support.
That totally tracks. Yes, thank you. Thank you both for that framing. And I think your book is, I think, a testament to this first question I was going to ask, but I'll ask it anyway in case you have a succinct answer. But this idea of freedom dreaming is really important to me, the show, I think the field of education. And so Dr. Bettina Love describes this as dreams grounded in the critique of injustice. So I think thinking about that, what is the freedom dream that you all hold for the field of education?
I think the first thing that comes up for me, rooted in this concept of transformational justice by Maisha Wen, is that there's reciprocal trust and humanization between students, between teachers, between administration, in that the system works for everybody. Right now, the system doesn't work for anybody, right? Doesn't work for students, it doesn't work for teachers. And so how my dream is for an education system where students flourish, meaning like both academically, but also their inner self as well, right? Their sense of belonging, their sense of who they are, being affirmed and validated, and a system where they see people like them in the books they read, etc. And also for teachers, a system where teachers flourish as well. Because as we know, it's hard and it doesn't really work for anybody, which is why so many teachers are leaving the field. Um, and so those are the first things that come to mind. And also just like I dream of something outside the box, right? Like right now we have schools and a brick and mortar and students sit in their desks X amount of hours a day. What does it look like to take education outside or connect it to the land or connected to outside things outside the walls, make it more real, which might be more exciting for everybody involved as well. So those are the first things that come to mind for me.
Yeah, there's also this element in our schooling system that is grounded in zero-sum thinking, grounded in meritocracy, which is a false paradigm. There's a gentleman who like has done research on that, and I'm drawing a complete blank on his name. But he had a TED talk that came out during COVID where he talked about it and said, we have schooling systems and structures where only a certain percentage are able to thrive to the top. And it's kind of the given norm and expectation that a certain percentage are going to fall below. And so if we're truly pushing for this concept of equality for everyone, it means meeting everyone where they are based on their readiness and creating schooling experiences that don't implicitly tell them their worth because of these structures that don't actually fit who they are as a learner. Um, as a product of New York City public schools, you know, I experienced this firsthand in a number of different ways, and working in that system and working across our country in like a number of different school systems that are similar in design and structure. And also, as the parent of a school age child who's in a New York State school system, I see so many different layers of it where each system is perpetuating the same rhetoric, right? That only certain groups of individuals are quote unquote worthy. And I think our teaching implicitly mirrors that, not because we go into this work of like going to the work of education wanting to only teach a select few, but because the system is like intentionally pressuring us to be in alignment with that rhetoric. Um, and teachers get caught in the middle. And so, how do you, as a teacher, find the balance between I want all of my kids to thrive and dream and grow up to be humans and adults in society that will feel as though their voice and their lives matter when I have competing expectations.
Yeah, actually, I wonder if this is a good time to talk about that kind of hidden curriculum piece of your book, because I think that illuminates exactly what you're talking about and describing. Like, I was kind of floored when I read the table, and also very like head nodding, like, yes, I have seen this. I've seen this play out. When I don't remember exactly what you guys call it, but it's kind of like the class management approach, based on kind of like a class of worker in kind of an industrial system, or capitalist system, I should say. And so I'm curious if we can kind of unpack that a little bit for folks who don't have the book yet, like can kind of give them a preview.
Sure. So when I think about the hidden curriculum, I think about what are the messages that we are sending, intended or not intended, right? Down to like what is how we set up structure in our classrooms, or what do our walls say, or what do our communication styles like say, and how does that differ based upon who's in front of us, who the students are in front of us, or the neighborhoods in which we're teaching, right? So I think the definition we give in the book is that the hidden curriculum refers to the content, topics, or ideologies that purport implicit messaging within larger nation states that citizens are expected to internalize. Um, and like you said, capitalism in the US kind of like undergirds that. And so, Professor like AU, I might be saying that wrong, is kind of who I read to first when I was first exposed to this. And they talk about the working class and how, like, in the working class, teachers are expected, teachers expect students to adhere to stricter disciplinary codes, submit to like figures of authority, copy things down, and not really make too many decisions on their own, and how oftentimes there's like less creativity for the working class in schooling. And then when we think about the middle class, teachers often expect students to get the right answers and understand how they got it, to occasionally make decisions, to follow directions, etc. And then, like the more fluent professional class, teachers expect students to like complete more creative activities independently, choose the methods and materials they'll work with, right? There's more creativity, etc. And then the executive, it's like develop analytic powers, make decisions, challenge answers, etc. And when I first heard about this as well, I was like, oh wow. It helped me also explain like some of my experiences living and working in New York City for the last number of years. I've worked in schools all over the city in all different neighborhoods. And I remember specifically the first time I was a coach in a school in an affluent neighborhood. That first day I was there, I went into the bathroom and I cried. Because up until that point, I had been working in neighborhoods that were very different from that, where oftentimes students were more policed, right? And then being in this school where kids just get out of their seat without permission to go get water because they need water or to go to their backpack, they didn't need to get permission. And just like juxtaposing that to like don't get out of your seat without permission, like, or just even the creativity. Some of them were sitting on the floor during lessons. There wasn't this like, you must be in your seats, you must sit up straight. Like, it just felt very different. And also the students in that school were from different backgrounds. And I just cried because I was like, wow, like from day one, kindergarten, they're interacting with schooling very different. In ways that create decision making and create and promote creativity and all the things.
There's an additional layer to that too, when we're thinking about the role of teachers in pushing back against these capitalistic systems. And again, capitalism is everywhere. We're not gonna go down that rabbit hole because there's like so much that can be said about it, particularly as it relates to schooling practice and as Jacoby just alluded to. And we adults, children are not really separate from that system. And so I'm going to read a line from page 90 of the book. Um, Classism and economics are not the only factors that influence the hidden curriculum. A teacher's intersectional identity can impact the lens through which they see the content and curriculum. In chapter 2, page 25, we discuss the concept of intersectionality. People's lived differences, or lived experiences rather, differ based on the intersection of their identities. And we go on to talk about what is intersectionality, what does it mean to unpack who you are as a person, and then how that shows up in the classroom, and how do we do that for students. If we think about our own lived experiences as educators, we have been unconsciously indoctrinated with some of the ideology that relates to the hidden curriculum, that relates back to meritocracy. Michael Sandel is actually the scholar who talks about that, the concept of meritocracy, by the way. And so we have to be continuously conscious of how these paradigms are showing up in our daily work and interactions with kids.
Thanks for that, Reshma, because I think I was like softly alluding to that in the example where I'm like, I went to the bathroom and cried, right? But it was because of the intersectionality, right? The more affluent school was like more white kids with more money, right? And the schools that I'd worked in the majority of my time up to that, were students who experienced poverty, and were brown. So, thank you. And I also thank you for bringing up capitalism as well, because it's not like I don't think teachers are inherent, like we're born into the system that kind of feeds us towards these outcomes, because that's what it's designed to do. So I just want to be clear. I don't think people wake up saying like, "Oh, I'm going to teach these kids differently because of who they are." No, it's just a part of the bigger system that we're all born into.
Yeah, I think this kind of connects, at least I'm thinking it connects to kind of the authenticity piece and the kind of framing for the whole book. So I'm curious if we could maybe go there next and connect that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Do you guys want to define it for us and kind of think about that through line?
Yeah, so Jacoby and I went back and forth around thinking about this concept of authenticity throughout writing the book, and the definition of it truly changed over its iterations. I would say that the final authentic, like the definition that we landed on was being able to be continuously conscientious of the identities that you're bringing into the classroom and acting on those identities in a way that allows you to teach and connect to students and humanize them while also creating a culture of empathy that is reciprocal for you and for students back to you. Um, we know that there are lots of ed books out there like Teach Like a Champion. We both came from a charter world and we don't mind some of the principles that are in those books. Um, but when enacted, it divorces teachers from who they are, um, and focuses more so on the technicality of teaching as opposed to the softer skills that go into it.
That makes so much sense to me. Go ahead, Dr. Bell, sorry.
Um, And I was just gonna read a line from chapter 10 in our book where we define authenticity. And it's funny because we talk about like some people may call it like keeping it real, like who are you? Keeping it real. Or like having a keen awareness of who you are. So on page 10, we say, in this book, we define authenticity as being in touch with your inner self so you don't get lost in pleasing others in ways that are detrimental to yourself and your students, right? And that's like exactly what Reshma was hinting at in terms of like when we do technical pieces divorced from who we are, they don't work. And we're not keeping it real, and kids know when we're keeping it real and when we're not keeping it real. And also, it detracts from our satisfaction in the work as well, at least what I have found.
The quote you read, I have written down in like 3 different places. So yes, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to. Yeah, that is totally it. And I think, I mean, I'm looking at my notes now and thinking about too how much like from a practical sense of like, okay, so I'm thinking about someone who may be new to some of these concepts, who's listening or engaging with the episode and thinking about, okay, so now I've gotten this kind of gut punch of the hidden curriculum thing. Whoa, that's happening. I'm realizing that like for me to be authentic, to be joyful, to be like not causing harm, but even more than that, to like enable enacting justice and pursuing justice in my class, like I need to ask myself some questions. And I think there's so many illuminating conversations. I think it's Dr. Bell that you had with a kind of a teacher who I'm assuming is a kind of a pseudonym throughout. And there were so many great questions you asked and great sample responses that were given. I also know that there's a bunch of tools in that chapter on harm. So I don't know if either of you want to talk through any of those pieces. There was like the unpacking harm, processing harm tools, and then the audit questions that people can ask about different aspects of kind of pedagogy, instruction, class culture. There's so much I think is what I want to get at for teachers who are in that space. Like I need to learn more, I need to do this better. I'm motivated to do this, but I need some tools that kind of help me process.
I think the first thing we tried to do in that chapter is kind of define harm, right? Because sometimes harm can be hard to see, right? We may know that something doesn't feel good to us or etc. But not always. And so we kind of talk about harm in the different contexts in terms of spiritual harm, right? Dr. Bettina Love talks about like spirit murder, right? Or the pedagogical harm, like what happens when with punishment and reward systems or non-rapport, etc. Or even curricular harm, right? When a kid doesn't have any connections to the curriculum or social, right? Going back to the what Reshma was saying about intersectionality, neurodiverse, the list goes on. And so some of the tools that we included, one that really sticks out to me, is the tool of like meditation. It's something that I was never into. But then over the pandemic, I got into it more, and learned very like concrete tools that as an educator helped me work through harm. In our book, we talk about harm for students, harm for teachers, and like how do you reconcile those two or try not to do harm in those areas. But the first step is really like acknowledging it and then working through it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this point, Jacoby, of like meditation. And I think for listeners, meditation might initially, the first thing that comes to mind, and I say this as a practicing Hindu, that you're going to sit there, palms up, you're chanting Om, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that you are engaging in this work of mindfulness through a series of reflexive prompts, which we do include throughout the book. And there's a graphic on 117 that I think offers a beautiful visualization of what Jacoby was just referring to, that we come into this work with unconscious harm that has lived in us, that has either been enacted on us or we are unintentionally enacting on others. No one really gets out of the public school K-12 system without being unscathed in some way, shape, or form. And then if you choose to become an educator, you go back into that system and these unconscious things just kind of show up in your work without realizing it. And so the visual that I'm describing is essentially a tree. And then you have the roots, which are the like unconscious ways in which the harm might live within us. You have the perpetuation of harm, which is where, the larger system is represented by a rain cloud and it's like raining down on us. And we are unintentionally like putting back on others. Then it's manifested through the growth of the tree. But then when we stop, reflect, and act, we can go towards like a liberatory experience, which is symbolized by the sun. Um, you know, I'm an optimist, so I believe that educators want to do well by children. I don't think teachers, generally speaking, go into this field um, wanting to inflict harm, which is why the chapter is like parentheses, try to do no harm. It's just how do we become more mindful of what we're doing and how we're interacting and engaging with students.
And a couple of the tools related to like what we're talking about. I think one of the first tools we talk about is empathy interviews. And empathy interviews are where you interview your students um, as a group or one-on-one. Like, tell me about a time you enjoyed class, or tell me about a time when you felt frustrated in class. Why? It's under like what undergirds empathy interviews is this desire to like understand students and like what are they telling you they need from you to help you adjust your classroom instruction, etc. But empathy interviews don't just have to go one way, teacher to student. They can also go the other way as well. So there's also something called empathy 360 where it's like all around view, so then students are interviewing teachers. Like if you had three wishes for our class, what would they be, Or then also teachers can interview caregivers or families. Like what would a joyful and good school look like for your child? So it's like this 360 view. Um, and it's a tool that builds empathy between all stakeholders, in a way to help folks see each other. It's so often to get frustrated of like, oh, why can't they just do this thing? Or why isn't this happening? Or, we've all had those days. And empathy, 360 interviews really help us see each other, but then also synthesize into like concrete next steps. And as coaches, we've seen some really powerful work come out of empathy interviews. Something we do more on the teacher side in terms of like processing potential harm and moving forward is writing an apology to students, acknowledge the wrong. Students are so forgiving. So forgiving. I know I've had times where something small, like one of my pet peeves is always like when students would sharpen their pencil with the electric pencil right in the middle of my mini lesson. I'd be like, "Are you serious?" But my reaction, like that didn't warrant that reaction. You know what I mean? So then it's like I had to apologize and, whatnot. But so that's one of the tools we offer. And another tool we offer is like write a letter to your early self. So your early career self, what do you want them to know? What is something positive you've benefited from hearing back that you would have benefited from back then? So like Reshma said, the exercises are really meant to reflect and help people move forward.
I love them. And I love that you mentioned the empathy interviews. I come from the kind of student voice field of research. And so there's so much in your book. There's like on co-construction and just like all of the pieces that I'm like, yes, this. And so that kind of leads me to think about the Afrofuturism chapter, which I adored. And so the liberatory lens examples where you kind of were just dreaming of here's what it could be. And I think Dr. Bell, you got it. That's at the beginning too, talking about your freedom dream, right? Like, let's think about connecting to place and like being outside of the walls. Like, what are some of the things either from the book or just things you would add now in this conversation that you can kind of like dream up or envision for a more liberatory school, either structure, practice, way of being?
Hi, this is Leah, popping in to share the free resource for this episode, a free reproducible Recognizing the Hidden Curriculum. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/229. Now back to the show.
That's a big question. Sorry.
Well, I was trying to let Reshma go first, but I can go first.
Well, I know the question was for you, like because in full transparency, Jacobē is a big proponent of Afrofuturism in schools and learning spaces, and in our work, she like has brought it in to professional development. So I was like, I feel like this is
Okay.
you should lead us in this one, Jacobē.
Okay, I got us. I got us. So like Afrofuturism, so I find it hard sometimes because we're so conditioned by how things are, to think, and it's like easy to think about like little changes, but when you want to think on like a macro level, or whole country like redo level, it can get overwhelming, and sometimes it's like, am I dreaming big enough, right? Like, and so I turned to Afrofuturism and like speculative fiction more generally, to because where else are dreams bigger than in these like worlds that have been built in books? And so Afrofuturism is a Black cultural lens used to consider the future. It's also used for other things, but that's like how we take it up in the book. Um, as a way to divest from the like status quo, and like think about something different. And there's like different tenets that come up with Afrofuturism. So I wrote down like some guiding questions to like begin to dream. Like, what are the things we want to disrupt? Like being able to notice and name them first. But then also thinking about like what are the habits that we need to have to freedom dream, but then also this idea of centering humanity in it all. So thinking about the full person and the full humanization of folks, and thinking about like to deny someone else's, like as Pablo Freire says, like to deny someone else's humanization is also to deny one's own. And how it's like, yes, it's an individual, like I can do what I can do in my classroom, but it's also like a collective endeavor as well. And it involves everyone working together, students, teachers, parents, admin, like, people working together. And then like when thinking about full liberation, thinking about how the noticing and naming, but also like critical reflection and action are necessary to transform. Um, so I know that's a mouthful. But I think like the core idea that I'm trying to say is like within our dreaming, centering the humanity, and then using Afrofuturism to think outside the box. So I had folks in a PD do a free writing activity, thinking about like what brings you joy? Where do you feel freedom? Where do you feel more happy? What are the conditions? What do you see, hear, smell? And using that as the basis for dreaming, and then drawing a picture, doing a free write, or writing a poem or something that kind of gets at that to help folks dream, and myself included, to dream bigger. Sorry, I forgot the original question I was answering.
No, if you want to share, that was excellent. That was an excellent framing. And then if you want to share some of the pieces that were on, I don't know if there was a chart there that had like a bunch of examples of like, here's what it could look like through a liberatory lens. Like, what could education be that it typically isn't currently?
So the chart that you're referring to is on 151, table 6.1. But before we talk about that, I just want to echo what Jacobē said with drawing folks, listeners' attention to page 154. If you have the book, if not, I'm going to describe it for you. The three habits that Jacobē was talking about, we broke them down to say what is habits of being, habits of listening, I'm sorry, habits of living, habits of teaching. And then underneath each, there are a series of guiding questions, definitions, and examples so you can understand what this would look like in real time. Um, then in table 6.1, we brought it back to here are some of the structural elements that exist within schooling systems. So you have the general structure of the school, you have curriculum and instruction, you have student agency, three powerful elements that can really, when shifted to take more of a dreaming based standpoint or Afrofuturistic standpoint, can open up the doors for possibility. And so one of the examples that we talk about was with curriculum and rethinking what gets to be taught. So this goes back to our earlier conversation around the hidden curriculum, right? Like, why aren't we teaching about more global civilizations in our history classes? Um, yes, I know in the New York State curriculum, you have like the introductory cursory dip your toe in the water of like ancient civilizations. But why aren't we doing a more deeper dive? Right? Why aren't we unpacking what schooling looked like in those spaces, what children might have learned, and then bringing that back into our own classrooms and classroom paradigms? Very similarly with student agency, the example that we give of having students take more of a sociocratic approach to decisions where students are involved, where we put a referendum out and kids have a voice, or if students have a desired outcome for their classroom or their schooling community, that they are putting it forth, advocating, pushing for the change, and leaders and educators are open to hearing that. They might even, I mean, some people will say, well, that's student government. Yes, but depending on how student government is structured, it could still limit the voices of everyone, right? Um, where some students might see that as an elite position that you have to advocate for, campaign, whereas from a ground up, roots based approach, it allows everyone to have input and a say.
Oh, that totally resonates because my dissertation was kind of on that, like problematizing student governments and like this needs to be bigger and you need to go outside of like planning prom or whatever the thing is, right? Like, yes. Okay. Thank you for naming that. I realize that we only have a few more minutes. Wow, time flies. And so I'm curious to know, I think maybe like two questions. If we could fit them in, we'll do like a lightning round. One, we've talked about a lot. Your book has far more than we've talked about. What is maybe one step that people could take after they're done with the episode and they're like, I want to just start something now. Like, I want to do something immediately that's going to help me be in alignment, show up, be authentic in these ways that you describe. Any recommendations?
I think um, too low lift but high impact things might be the first one, do empathy interviews. It doesn't take that much prep time to hear from students, parents, etc. It doesn't have to be everyone. You could pick 5 students. So I think that's one. I also know it's summer though, so some people may not be in school. I think another like thing that's easy to do is audit your curriculum. Look at like whose voices are the most prevalent there, what's missing. And I know a lot of districts mandate you have to do this curriculum and you have to, okay, but then how do we layer on? Shout out to Goldie Muhammad. How do we do like text layering or something to bring in other voices as well?
Those are my two too.
You know
Those
they're
are like
good
the
then.
easiest entry. Yeah, they're like the easiest entry points into doing this work, and low effort, high impact. Um, I think the other component would be to think about, just start with reflection. And I would say we have a lot of great guiding reflection questions in our book. But I think the two that you would want to start with are, what does it mean to create a dream-based liberatory classroom? And then the second would be, what would my life be like if I had access to that dream-based liberatory classroom? Um, and we're not saying to have folks have like an existential crisis at all, right? Like it's more so thinking about, if I can envision what like a liberatory classroom like feels like, sounds like, I could touch it, I can see it, I can smell it. Um, what would that have looked like if someone had enacted that space for me as well?
Those are fantastic. Thank you for those questions. Last question for you all. We're going to link to the book in the show notes, but I wanted to know, where can people get in touch with you or follow the work that you're doing?
Yes. The best place to get in touch with me is via LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can shoot me a message there. Yeah. And you can get our book from Amazon from Solution Tree.
Yeah, you can definitely contact me through LinkedIn. My social media handle is Risha0927 for Instagram. And then you can contact me via email, Reshma at equityconsultinggroup.org.
Dr. Ramkellawan, Dr. Bell, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation and for your amazing book.
Thank you. We really
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan, from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no-strings-attached brainstorm call at lindsayBethLyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.